According to British healthcare and insurance company BUPA, about 2 people in every 10 in the UK suffer from IBS and get up to 6 episodes per year or more. With IBS affecting so many people, I thought that we should find out more about IBS and pose the question, does your food trigger IBS? This series explores health and wellness. We do it under the premise that some illnesses and diseases may be avoidable. As a health and wellness explorer, I interview wellness experts and dive deep into an aspect of health and wellness with the aim of giving you greater understanding so you have the freedom to make the best choices about your health based on your individual uniqueness. If you want to explore your health and wellness, subscribe and hit the bell to get notified of all of our latest uploads as they happen. And if this channel can help your friends or family, please also share it with them too. This week, our topic is, does your food trigger IBS? And joining me to increase our knowledge and understanding is Dr Chris Pickard. So today we're talking about, does your food trigger IBS? So Chris, let's just jump straight in. Tell us first of all, what is IBS?
Well, that's basically irritable bowel syndrome according to the NHS website, and pretty much if you go to anyone, it's a mixture of kind of bloating, pain in the belly, could be diarrhea, could be constipation, could be swinging from one way to the other, stomach cramps. It's basically a collection of bowel-like symptoms that aren't actually a disease. So these symptoms just get stuck with a label called irritable bowel syndrome, as if that's some kind of magical diagnosis.
Okay, so how do people get IBS?
That is not easy to answer in less than, say, a few hours. Again, according to medicine, there's no real known single cause of it. They don't really know why people just get it. Some people it's put down to the food they eat. Some people it's because they had maybe some bug and then their stomachs remained irritable ever since, off and on. But it really comes from a number of different things happening. The first thing with IBS though is to actually rule out major problems like inflammatory bowel disease, which is things like Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. It can be secondary from other conditions as well, so you've got cancers as well if it's just started. But a lot of drugs can start it. So people in pain take ibuprofen, Nurofen, paracetamol. That can start it.
Right. Okay.
It can be, very often, it can be antibiotics as well. Because when you have antibiotics, they don't just kill the bad bugs, they kill all the good bugs that are in your gut as well. And that then leads to irritable bowel syndrome. So there's a huge list. Stress is another big factor. As you get stressed, it can change your gut bacteria, your microbiome, but it can also alter the way your nerves are working to the gut. Then there can be too much of it, not eating the right foods. So they ferment in your gut. Too much sugars. And then, what was the other one I wanted to really mention? Yes, too much exercise. That can be a big cause of irritable bowels.
That last one really surprises me. Tell me, how does that happen? I mean, too much, what kind of exercise?
Okay, basically it's too much endurance exercise. So going out and running or cycling for more than 2 hours, and some people even less than that, on a regular basis. Because when you exercise, it creates inflammation. Even as I just lift up my arm and do that, some muscle fibers are going to break. There's going to be some inflammation. But when you go out and do lots of exercise, your body creates a huge amount of inflammation. And this inflammation has to be quelled down. And your gut is one area that will get inflamed. And I'll probably loop back to this as well. Is one of the big probable causes of irritable bowels is when you get what's called a leaky gut. And a leaky gut. Now, all of the cells in your body, or in the lining of your gut, I should say, are stuck together. Okay, And the thing that sticks them together is something called a tight junction. And they're stuck like that so that food has to come into the cells and then it's transported through the cells and into your body, into your bloodstream. But if these tight junctions are apart, then it allows food, bigger parts of food, through and into your system. And this can then start causing all kinds of reactions in the body. It can cause food to ferment inside your body. It can cause your immune system to go, what's that? And you start having an immune response, which can then start causing allergic reactions to food. And so then you start getting more irritation from healthy foods because your body's created an immune reaction to it. But there's also a reason why we may have these tight junctions falling apart sometimes. Because there are some things that we can't absorb properly unless those tight junctions do come apart. And those are immune proteins that you will find in things like organ meats, but also breast milk. And the intestines of babies have lots of holes in them to allow the immune proteins from their mother's milk into their body so that the mother can pass on immunity to them. Because if those junctions were tight, the immunity could not be passed on. And so it's a theory that one of the reasons that endurance exercise may cause so many of these tight junctions to come apart is because at the end of a hunt, traditionally, the first thing you'd eat would be organ meats.
Right.
And so it may be that it's part of that adaptation that after a long hunt and you go and eat those organ meats, your system wants to absorb as many beneficial nutrients as possible. But these days, of course, we're going out for a run. We're not having immune proteins from offal. We're going out and maybe having a sugary rehydration drink, which allows sugar into your system, which causes more inflammation.
That's really fascinating. Really, really interesting, actually, just as someone who exercises, does do cardio exercise, and I've actually suffered from leaky gut as well. So I know exactly what you're talking about here. And all of those wonderful allergic reactions to other foods as well. It was amazing, actually, the list of things that I needed to remove from my diet for a period of time. So very interesting to hear you talk about this. So tell us about what kind of foods can trigger IBS.
Well, this is where we get back to stress, tension, drugs. Even tea and coffee can actually cause tight junctions to separate. And so what tends to happen is we have a tight junction that's open for whatever reason, whether it's a good reason or a bad reason, and then we eat some food, whether it's broccoli or whether it's onions or whether it's something that we shouldn't be eating too much of, like pasta, for instance, and I'll get back to that. And so these foods then get into the system and that then sets up the immune reaction. So it's not so much that the foods trigger IBS, it's the fact that when we repeatedly eat even something healthy like broccoli, we will become more likely to become allergic to it because we increase the chances of it one day getting to a tight junction and our immune system wanting to attack it. So this is why people end up, when they have an an IgG test or an IgE test, they come up with a long list of things like they're allergic to all these healthy foods. And so they have to avoid them. But really the answer is, you've actually got to heal those tight junctions, you've got to heal the gut, and then you can eat these things properly. And you've got to rotate what you eat. So the best way to do something is to make sure you have a rotation diet. So you're not eating the same thing every day or even every week. So you decrease the chance of getting allergic to it. But there are definitely some foods that are going to increase the amount of tight junctions that open. And the top of the list is all gluten-containing foods. So that's why I just say pasta or rice, or rice doesn't contain gluten, but bread, things like that. Because gluten itself doesn't rip apart the tight junctions, but wheat contains another protein called zonulin. And zonulin rips the tight junctions apart. So if you eat wheat, whether it's gluten-free or not, and then eat any other food, whether it's a healthy food or not, you increase the chances of those foods setting up some kind of reaction. So the number one thing on my list is wheat is the number one cause of IBS. And then you have sugary foods and drinks, because they can cause tight junction shaking. Tea and coffee, if you're drinking too much of it, that can be a problem as well.
Would yeast appear on your list somewhere as well?
Not really, no, because normal amounts of yeast our body can cope with. We have yeasts and funguses living within inside us. It's only when yeast gets out of control, which is usually because of other things going on, then it becomes a problem.
So maybe after something like taking a course of antibiotics or something, would yeast then flare up, and could that cause damage?
It could do, because once you've had the antibiotics, there's no good bacteria, and so because there's nothing there, then yeasts and funguses can move in more easily.
Yeah, and then move in and grow. Just really interested in terms of how quickly this happens, because it sounds like, you know, with exercise, you mentioned, the body's adapting very, very quickly to open these tight junctions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for some reason, I'd assumed that this might take longer, but it sounds like it could be minutes to hours to this.
Yeah, there's probably, I mean, I don't know, there's probably something that happens almost immediately, but it's really after about 2 hours of exercise.
Right. Okay.
Or if you're like doing an hour of hard exercise every single day and you're not letting yourself rest and repair.
Yeah. So the rest and recovery becomes really important. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what you eat after you exercise is really critical as well.
Interesting you mentioned that, because another interview I've just done with Sarah Taylor, who's
bodybuilder.
Bodybuilder, exactly. Yes. And we were talking about nutrient timing. So things that she was doing, we were talking about the timing to eat certain foods. I'd be interested to know your take on this as well, actually, and combine the two conversations. For you, in terms from a nutritionist point of view, what kind of foods would you be recommending that we're eating quite close to finishing our exercise?
Well, there is a big thing out there based on, I mean, I suppose it must be based on the fact that after you exercise, after you hunt, that is a natural time to eat. Okay? But there doesn't seem, as far as I'm aware, to be any real evidence as to whether it matters when you eat directly after exercise or not.
Yeah.
As to what then happens. Now, in the bodybuilding world, they are experts at building muscle. And if you want to build muscle, you speak to a bodybuilder and you just follow their advice, because they know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. But there are many, many, many functional nutritionists, medics, and even there's some really big, strong, powerful guys out there who played around with the timing of food afterwards. And they found that basically you don't have to eat protein within 15 minutes of exercise, and you can, as long as it's within 12 to 24 hours.
Yeah.
So
interesting. Yeah.
I think the thing is you've got to try something, and then if you're not getting, so for instance, you want to build muscle, and if you're not getting the results you need, try something different.
Yeah.
Try something.
And that fits in right in with our philosophy here at Total Wellness Club, really, because you know, we're all about what works for you as a unique individual. We are all a bit different, and you have to find what works for you. This is why we do these interviews and explore all of the different angles of health and wellness. People watching this video, do give us a thumbs up if you like the content that Chris is sharing with us here and you're finding it really helpful. And also do please post comments as well and tell us where you're at with what Chris is saying, and ask any questions that you have so that we can obviously fill in the blanks for you. Chris, why is it important to even treat mild IBS?
Well, it's basically, well, Hippocrates said this, although he said it in Greek, ancient Greek, is that basically all disease starts in the gut.
Yeah.
And once your gut is dysfunctional, even if it's mildly dysfunctional, your gut is what's absorbing all the nutrients you need for the rest of your body to work, whether it's for your muscles, or your bones, or your brain, or your liver, or your pancreas, or your lungs, or your heart. So once your gut is dysfunctional, you cannot expect the rest of your body to be getting everything it needs for optimal health and well-being. So it's absolutely critical to not just say, okay, I've got IBS, that's the way it is. You want to try and find the cause of your IBS, and you want to get it fixed so that you can actually have optimal health. Because what we do know, for instance, is that Parkinson's disease is massively increased and seems to be related to problems with your bowel bacteria. And we know that the more antibiotics you have, the more likely you are going to get Parkinson's and other forms of dementia. So we know that there is a direct connection between what's happening in your bowel and your brain, and we know that dementia is on the rise. So we want to do absolutely everything we can to decrease that. We also know that if bacteria that are in your gut start spreading into your lungs, you have increased lung problems. We know that as we change the bacteria in your gut, it can change your insulin response. We know that it can change obesity rates. We know that it can alter how your thyroid works. It affects everything.
Yeah.
So it's the center. So it's absolutely critical not to ignore it, because it's the starting of something else.
So what should people know about IBS that they may not know?
Apart from everything else I've mentioned, apart from everything, well, there's a couple of things really, a couple of more anecdotal stories. Is the fact that IBS can come from muscles and also come from the back as well. One of the reasons I got interested in irritable bowels was because I originally trained as a chiropractor, was that a lot of people with back pain would often have gut problems as well. And some patients, their guts, their years of irritable bowel syndrome went when they actually had their spine checked and spine aligned and they got spinal manipulation. Likewise, some people's backs didn't get better until you fix their IBS.
Got you. Yeah.
So IBS can cause back problems can actually be causing the IBS.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine in the States, he had absolutely horrific Crohn's disease, and he was going to need a colostomy bag, and he was on loads of drugs. And it wasn't actually until he found a chiropractor that his Crohn's started to reverse, and he completely avoided having a colostomy bag, and he completely recovered and needed no drugs whatsoever. And this is a guy who's, turn away now to your screen, he was bleeding, 20 times a day from his back passage.
Wow.
At one point.
Wow.
And drugs were not helping.
Yeah.
And then just another really simple case was I once saw a child who was 10 years old, and it wasn't IBS, but he was chronically constipated. And he was 10 years old, he was going to Great Ormond Street, he'd been seen by all the top gastroenterologists at Great Ormond Street. He was on a number of drugs. And we did one thing, we massaged his bowel. One massage on his bowel fixed 8 years of problems, and it never came back again. So again, if you've got a gut problem, at least try massaging your own belly. It's free and it's easy to do.
I find this really interesting because there's almost like a loop in the body, isn't there? You know, the connections between the mind, the sort of brain and the gut, and the other parts of the body. You know, as you're saying, the back and massaging the stomach, and you know, the way that all this links together is really fascinating for me. I can't find the words to explain it. I'm passionate about it.
Yes.
As someone who's exploring their health and wellness. But yeah, what you're just saying there is really fascinating. Chris, I'd like to ask you about a challenge.
Yes.
We like to ask all of our experts to give us a challenge based on the topic that we've been talking about. So what would your challenge be for us?
Okay, so one of the doctors that taught me quite a lot about the gut is a guy from the state called Dr. Robert Silverman. And he tells all his patients to avoid GPS and DNA. Now, we're not talking about global positioning satellites or DNA that runs your cells, but GPS is shorthand for gluten, processed foods, and added sugars. So he's not talking about eating fruit, he's talking about anything that's added, even if you take fruit sugar from a fruit and then you add it to something else, that's bad.
Yeah.
When it's inside the sugar, that's okay. So avoid gluten, processed foods, and added sugars. And DNA is dairy, nicotine, AC smoke, and artificial sweeteners as well, because artificial sweeteners can cause huge problems with some people. So that's gluten, processed foods, sugars, added sugars, and then dairy, nicotine if you smoke, and artificial sweeteners.
So how long should we try and avoid these for?
Forever. Because they're all wrong. They're all wrong. They're all perverted in some way. But I would say just try it for 7 days.
7 days.
Just try it for 7 days. Just have a look at how much rubbish is in your diet and just avoid it for 7 days and see how much better you feel.
Yeah. So we're trying this for 7 days, GPS and DNA. Yes, we try this for 7 days and just notice the difference that how we feel at the end of that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, that'd be an interesting experiment, especially for people who are consuming those products. You know, especially with things like gluten, which for some people may be in almost every meal that they're eating. And also with the added sugars as well. Could be exactly the same. So there could be some dietary changes people may need to be making as well. Maybe that will be the next video. Maybe we should do that one next.
Yeah. The biggest, I'll just give this, this will help, because a lot of people, when you say dairy and then you also say gluten, they suddenly hang on. Every day I have cereal for breakfast, and that's a wheat-based product with milk on it. And this is one of the reasons why so many people are so unhealthy, because for breakfast they're having a wheat-based product with dairy on it. So go and look up, Google dairy wheat-free breakfasts, or look up something like paleo breakfasts to try and find, and if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, look up vegan or vegetarian paleo breakfasts. And that's going to help you get over the breakfast.
Cool, love that. I suppose people can also equally maybe Google smoothies and juices, that kind of thing. Natural in sugar, as you said. Yeah, cool. Nice one, Chris. Well, thank you very much for that. Thank you for your time today exploring foods that trigger IBS with us. Really have appreciated that. I found this really fascinating. So I appreciate your time. Yeah, as we're exploring the foods that can trigger IBS, I found this topic today really fascinating. As someone who has, as I said, suffered from leaky gut, it was really interesting to hear Chris talking about some of the potential causes of this, including exercise or medication, and also certain foods that we may eat that may actually trigger it. I also found it really interesting looking at that circular loop within the body, the feedback, the intelligence of the body. So when we do something that's maybe not great for us, how it responds. Are you up for taking Chris's 7-day challenge where we remove the GPS and the DNA from our foods? If you're up for taking that challenge, please do let me know in the comments below. And look out for my challenge roundup video where I take part in all of the challenges that our experts give us this month. And I also post my discoveries from those. And you'll be able to see my findings from that in my challenge roundup video in a couple of weeks' time. To get that video and all of our latest health and wellness uploads, including interviews and reviews, please subscribe and hit the bell to get notified whenever we post. And if this channel can help your friends and family, please do share it with them too. Also, if you want to get proactive with your health and wellness, then Total Wellness Club are developing health quests for you over at questly.life. Join while we're developing the site, and you'll get instant access to health quests that immediately personalise your health. You'll get to identify which of 10 critical health categories need your attention. You'll be able to track your progress, and you'll be able to help us develop the platform as we go. I'll put a link in the description below so that you can get to Questly, and I'll see you next week.